Something that I learned this past week while I was preparing for today's sermon on Good Shepherd Sunday was that in early Christian art, when art historians and archaeologists look at the depictions of Jesus in the first couple of centuries after his death, so think Jesus has been gone less than 100 years, or maybe 100, 150 years, 200 years. In those first few centuries of Christianity, the primary depiction of Jesus was not Jesus on a cross. The cross didn't become a symbol in Christianity until much later, like the 4th or 5th century, because remember, it was still being used to crucify people. It was an instrument of torture and death. And it wasn't, Jesus, what we call in Greek, Christopanokrator, the Christ ruling over the world, these kind of triumphant images. It wasn't even the iconography like you may have seen in Eastern iconography of Jesus rising from the dead and pulling up Adam and Eve out of hell. None of that. The image that they find everywhere in the catacombs, on sarcophagi, on frescoes and painted in walls and caves where early Christians met, is the image of the Good Shepherd. Now, when I learned that, I immediately thought of what I learned about the development of our children's formation program, the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, because in the, say, late first half of the 20th century, Sofia Calvaletti, an Italian scholar, and her collaborator Gianna Gobbi, who had been with Maria Montessori in the early days of the Montessori movement, when Montessori started working with street children in Rome, they began to offer together different scriptures and teachings from the Bible and the sacraments of the church, and developing different materials and ways of trying to get these to speak to children. And they used what Maria Montessori, I've only and best heard described in kind of like a sound and not a word, but they're looking for that moment when the child goes, right? Because what's been offered is what Montessori calls the perfect food, the perfect match for that child. And they had what they called a giant closet of humility, where they would just put all the things that didn't work, and it got really, really full over the years. And what did work is what's been handed down to us, what we continue to offer the children today. And you might have guessed where I'm going with this. Because the thing that worked the best, starting with children from the age of 3, and the thing that they put at the very center of their teaching, right, was, of course, the Good Shepherd. That's why it's called the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And so I thought about those early Christians, right, those nascent Christians, those people who had somehow been caught up in the Spirit and were following Christ, and were not even sure completely what that meant yet, and were being persecuted and killed for it. And I thought about small children, from the very youngest age, and I thought about a basic need that both shared, that I think is met in the Good Shepherd, and that's the need simply to be able to trust in someone who will care for us, to be able to trust, to place our trust in a worthy caregiver. We're wired that way as human beings. We know now from brain studies of infants that the distance that an infant can see is the distance from where they're held in a person's arms to that person's face. That's their visual fields. And they respond to faces and things that look like faces. And that's how we're wired as human beings, to connect with a caregiver, with a carer, to be in a loving relationship, to be held and to be safe so that we can live. Right? It's our most basic human need. And Jesus, in this understanding, I don't even want to just call it an image or a parable, because it's a gift, really. It's a gift of who he is. Offers us himself as our Good Shepherd. Izzy and Lucas and Jacob and I, I'm really going to try not to say anything embarrassing. I'm going to get in trouble later if I do. But we pulled out our Good Shepherd set last night because I wanted them to help me think about this parable. And we thought about it in the terms of that we read today with the wolf and the hireling. And those are images that we only bring in with our children that are older than 6 years old, 6 to 9, the level 2 atrium. They start to think about the presence of evil in the world and what it means that caregivers aren't always faithful, right? It's all right there, right? But at the earliest level, they think about, we focus more on that loving relationship. But Lucas said, this is a really unreasonable shepherd, because what shepherd would lay down his life for the sheep? That doesn't make any sense. It's just a sheep. It's going to get eaten. Anyway, why would anyone die for a sheep? Right? And I said, maybe that's the point of the parable. The places where this is not agricultural advice. The places where the parables don't seem to fit are actually the places where Jesus is asking us to stretch our imaginations, to look for something beyond our imaginations. Because we know that everything in this world and everyone in this world in some way and at some time will ultimately let us down. But the Good Shepherd never will. And we weren't telling that story, but we had to hide one of the sheep, how one of the sheep had to run away and get hidden under somebody's shirt or around the corner, because that's the cool thing about the Good Shepherd too, is that you can't get so lost. You can never get so lost that the Good Shepherd doesn't find you. And we talked about, what if the sheep is lost and the wolf finds it while it's lost and it gets eaten up? Can the Good Shepherd find it then? And Lucas had already answered the question, because he said the wolf represents death. Right? The Good Shepherd goes even there, right? The Good Shepherd dies and comes back so that we, even in death, cannot be lost. And you start to see why those early Christians were getting fed to lions. They have these images of the Good Shepherd on their sarcophagi and on the walls of their catacombs, because their faith in the one who shepherds their souls is so strong that nothing that happens to them in this world can negate that. I was on a call that a Zoom call this week with some other clergy, Episcopal priests and Lutheran pastors that I talked to as I'm preparing a sermon. And I have to tell you, this image and this passage about the Good Shepherd is one that clergy have a lot of hang-ups about, right? Maybe we have hang-ups about all Scripture, but this one especially, and especially if you have a primary language where the word for shepherd and the word for pastor is the same word, there's literally no difference, like in Spanish, pastor, or I learned in Chinese also it's the same word. I think a lot of languages probably. We get hung up on this because we think, okay, I'm working for the Good Shepherd. I know I'm not the Good Shepherd, but I'm working for the Good Shepherd. Am I a good enough shepherd? Right? And it was interesting hearing people reflect on that. We had one person who was an interim pastor who was with a congregation in a time between their permanent pastors, and really in that intentional time of cultivating, what do we let go of? What do we look toward? Who are we as a church, right? And where are we going? And she said, I think I'm a hired hand. I'm not going to be around that long. And another one who was just doing supply work for congregations that didn't have permanent clergy, she said, well, for sure I'm a hired hand, and I'm kind of loving it. I really like just showing up and being there with the people and whatever's going on and then leaving. And then another pastor who'd been in what we call an after pastor situation, who'd come in following a clergy person who was really more of a wolf and had done damage in this church. She said, it's been 5 years, and I think they're finally starting to trust me. But I consider that, having been here now almost 8 years and having gone through 6 weeks of training and catechesis of the Good Shepherd formation as a catechist, and feeling like I probably need to go and start it all over again, I feel like I've been raised up now in catechesis of the Good Shepherd, and I had something to offer from that perspective, because we have a material in the atrium that When the children have realized that we're the sheep, we don't tell them that we're the sheep. We let them figure that out over time. And it's really a lovely thing when, they learn about the love of the Good Shepherd. And we always ask the question, who could these sheep be, that are so loved and so cared for by this Good Shepherd? And eventually, this is mostly happening one-on-one or in small groups. Eventually, the children will say, it's me. I'm the sheep. I'm the one he's called by name. And you think that in their heart, that child has heard the Good Shepherd calling them by name. They've felt that love. And that's how they know that, right? So once they've realized that, we talk about the presence of the Good Shepherd, and everything we're doing is trying to tie back to this space, to what we call big church, to our liturgy and our sacraments, which is the life that feeds all of us. And we tell them, you might go in the church and you might not see, I don't think we have a picture of the Good Shepherd in our church. You might not see a statue or a picture, but there's a place in the church where the Good Shepherd is always present for us. And we put out a tiny little altar table and a tiny little bread and a tiny little wine, and we place the sheep. We take them out of the sheepfold one by one and place them in a circle around that altar. And we say the place where Jesus is always giving all of himself to us, where the Good Shepherd gives all of himself to us, is in his body and in his blood. And then, one by one, the children will reach into the box and replace the sheep with people. And they're all different kinds of people that get placed around the altar. And last of all, the sheep that's behind the altar gets moved. And the catechist says, and there's one sheep that has a special job. And that special job is just to say the words of Jesus. This is my body. This is my blood. This is all of me for you. So on that call, I got to tell my fellow pastors, guys, we're just one of the sheep. We're just sheep. Like, how great is that? It's the Good Shepherd. Yeah, we work for the Good Shepherd. We're not even sheepdogs. We're just sheep, We get to be one of the sheep. I was reflecting as we were talking with the kids last night. I remember most of my life thinking, it's really kind of a bummer to preach on Good Shepherd Sunday. It's because nobody wants to be compared to sheep. Sheep are dumb. I literally, a few years ago, I called all of the shepherds that I know, all of the people that have direct experience with sheep, and I'm like, tell me about sheep. I think it was shepherds and mothers. It was the Good Shepherd Sunday falling on Mother's Day. Tell me about sheep. How is taking care of sheep taking care of children? And they're like, well, it's like taking care of 2-year-olds. They are so recalcitrant. They are so stupid. It's not a metaphor. It's not a, rumors of sheep's stupidity have not been exaggerated. They literally. They need human beings. They have evolved, in such a way that without humans caring for them, they can't survive on their own. They'll get lost. They'll run straight into danger, instead of away from it. They will, if they don't get shorn, they just fall over and they can't get up again. Sheep, it's not a favorable comparison for us as human beings. And yet I found myself, as we were talking about this, so grateful, right? So grateful, because it means that I'm okay, right? God knows that I'm dumb. God knows that I keep turning left instead of right. No matter how many times God says, turn right, turn right, turn right. I want to go out, I'm going to turn left, right into danger, I'm going to fall down. And there's just one thing, right, that I need to do. And I'm not going to do it perfectly. The one thing that's asked of the sheep, the one thing that the sheep do in this metaphor is that they listen to the voice of their shepherd. And we're all here today because at some point in our lives we have heard that voice. I believe that all of us are born with, I was going to call it a compass, but I don't think it's even as neat as that. I think it's like a compass needle. Those fragile little needles, that you see inside of the compass that wiggle all over the place, and they're so tiny that it looks like anything would bend them. We have that needle inside of us, and it's always pointing, it's vibrating to the voice of the Good Shepherd, right? It's that whatever it is inside of you, that when you hear something that is deeply true, when you see something that is deeply beautiful, when you experience someone who is deeply trustworthy, points north. It says, that's it. And the great thing about the version of the parable that we get today is it talks about the fact that there's other voices, right? There's so much else trying to get our attention. And so what I'd like to ask you to think about today and this week as you go on is, what are those other voices? What do they sound like? Right? The voices that, tell you maybe you're just not ever going to be good enough. Or if you just buy this one thing or get this one thing or do this one thing, like that's going to take care of everything, right? Where are you hearing those voices? Where are you listening to those voices? And where do you hear the voice of the Good Shepherd calling your name? And how do you know that it is the voice of the Good Shepherd? How have you known? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? I promise you that it will not be giving you easy answers. But I can promise you also that it's a voice of hope. Hope beyond hope. Hope that life, that love, that the one who loves us uniquely and beyond our wildest imaginings will never let us go. It's interesting that this story, this image Jesus offers us, kind of not at they weren't he and the disciples out walking through the fields and saw some fluffy sheep and he said, "Oh, I'm the Good Shepherd. That's a nice thing." It wasn't like that. This story comes, John chapter 10 follows John chapter 9, which is the story of the healing of the man born blind. Jesus comes across a man who's been blind since birth, puts mud on his eyes, sends him to wash in the pool of Siloam, and the man is cured. He's able to see for the first time in his life, and it sparks a huge controversy. And ultimately, he confesses his faith in Jesus. He says, there's something to this guy because now I can see. And there's this whole controversy about, whose fault was it that he was born blind, and can you cure him, blah, blah, blah. And he gets kicked out of his community, of the synagogue. And Jesus goes and finds him. You see where the sheep thing comes from. He goes and finds the sheep, and he has this conversation with him where ultimately the man confesses his faith in Jesus, right? In the Messiah. And then the religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, they show up. They can't let it alone. They're going to keep after Jesus about this. Well, who sinned? Well, what? Blah, blah, blah. They're at him. They're after him. And it's in that conversation with his adversaries that Jesus tells us this story, right? And you think maybe he's thinking back to Psalm 23, in the presence of mine enemies. You bless me. My cup is overflowing. My table is full. You give me life in the presence of these people who he knows, right? Because it's John. We know he knows where this is headed. He starts talking about laying down his life and taking it up again. And in that garden, when the soldiers come and he says, "Don't take them, take me," right? He literally does that. Literally lays his life down for his beloved sheep. And what I really, really love about this version, this piece of John 10 that we get today, is the sheep don't get smug about it. Right? In case the sheep are like, "Oh, cool, we're on the end with Jesus." Jesus says, "I have other sheep." It's not too specific. We don't get to know who those other sheep are. I have other sheep from other folds, and I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, right? We can rejoice. We should rejoice in being sheep of the Good Shepherd. What a gift. And we should always be curious about where else that gift is being given in ways that we don't even maybe see or recognize or understand. So, my friends, as we continue in this Easter season, whatever is going on in your life or in this world, I hope that you take some time to tune in to that compass needle that points toward the Good Shepherd, that you listen deeply to his voice, so deeply that the other voices might start to fade into the background. Because being one of his sheep is actually the greatest gift. I've said these things to you in the name of our friend and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen.